Hey, what's up everybody? This is your boy Kenny, and this is my review of a great documentary on Netflix. And I must say, I am a huge fan, of this artist, and I have a lot of his music in my collection, and definitely one of my big inspirations. And this is a documentary called Quincy, which is on the life and times of Quincy Jones. Just the name some of the great accomplishments of this man. He has over 2,900 songs recorded. He has over 300 albums recorded. He has over 1,000. He has over 51 film and television scores. He has over 1,000 original compositions. He's been nominated for 79 Grammys and he's won 27. He's also an EGOT winner. And those who are awarded the EGOT, that means they've won all the prestigious awards in the music in the entertainment industry, meaning the Tony, the Grammy, the Emmy, and the Oscar. And he joins, he's a part of, he's a part of this EGOT club, which includes Whoopi Goldberg and just recently this year, John Legend. Pretty much, he's a part of Thriller, which was the best-selling album of all time. We Are the World is the best-selling single of all time, and which also raised $63 million for aiding famine in Africa. And he has 7 children, 6 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. And this episode was just amazing. I mean, when they show his house is like a museum, an actual museum of music history. Because this man has over 70 years in the music industry and has pretty much been the mentor of so many. For example, Dr. Dre and, Diddy, these great producers of hip-hop, they learned and were inspired by Quincy Jones. And we see that Dr. Dre was held in this podcast where he was interviewing Quincy Jones. And we just see the level of respect and admiration that he had for this legend was just everything. And he was even looking through his house and says, wow, there's so much history here. And pretty much throughout this documentary, and also this documentary was produced and directed by his daughter Rashida Jones, who we know Rashida was actually dating Tupac around the time of his death. And definitely, they definitely showcased the whole situation with Biggie and Tupac in this documentary as well. And when he held this summit, that we need to change the narrative of hip-hop, that it needs to be positive, and that we don't need to lose any more artists or young people to violence. And it even showed that he even was really tearing up and emotional about it because, Tupac became like a son to him after him and Rashida were dating. And I know definitely losing Tupac was very close to home for him. But one of my memories of Quincy Jones was the Back on the Block album. I think that album came out when I was 7, and my grandmother, God rest her soul, she definitely was a good fan. She definitely was a fan of Quincy Jones as well, and she played this album. And I think at the time I was moving from Washington D.C. to North Carolina, and I remember the whole 4-hour ride, she just played that Quincy Jones Back on the Block album back to back. And I remember one of my favorite songs was Tomorrow Will Bring, which was by, one of his proteges, Tevin Campbell. And I think Tevin Campbell, was like 11 or 12 at the time when he did that song. But I was just so captivated by that song. And then he had so many great legends on that album. I mean, that album, I would have to say, is definitely one of the highlights of music. If you really want to know the essence of black music and the history of black music, of how jazz and bebox actually molded into hip hop and R&B, that album is like a great it's just like a great representation of all these artists coming together. I mean, he had people from the likes of Ella Fitzgerald and Sarah Vaughan and Dizzy Gillespie, and hip hop artists like Millie Mill and Kumo D and Big Daddy Kane, and also had artists like Shaka Khan, Sadir Garrett, and Tevin Campbell, and many more that was on that album. And it was just a phenomenal piece of work. And I even still listen to that album to this day, and it still moves me. And it also has, one of the famous tracks of that album, Secret Garden, which was with El DeBarge, James Ingram, Barry White, and who was that fourth? It was a fourth person. It'll definitely come to me, but definitely those three I know was on it. Barry White, El DeBarge, James Ingram, and there was another person that just don't have it on the top of my head. But if y'all remember it, put it down in the comments. But that was definitely one of my favorite tracks on that album as well. But then they talk about his upbringing. He's from the South Side of Chicago. I think he was born in the late 1930s, and they talked about his mom was actually sent to an institution at the age of 7, and he actually witnessed them coming to get his mother, and they were like putting her on a straitjacket. And I know that had to be extremely traumatic for a child to see that your mother is not mentally stable. And he actually discussed that his mother was actually schizophrenic. And, he also had like this fear with his mother because his mother could just snap at any moment. And throughout his life, when he was around his mother, it was always this tension there. He loved his mom, but he never had that mother and son relationship. So that motherly love, he never really got. But he did love his mom, but his mom was just mentally unstable throughout his life. But he definitely learned a lot from his father, his father, I think, was a carpenter who worked for, these, big gangsters in Detroit, in Chicago. He even talks about him getting involved into gang activity. He had been stabbed with a switchblade and an ice pick. And then we even seen that, not too long ago, he recently had suffered a stroke and was in a diabetic coma, and he had to give up drinking, and he had to go to a low sugar diet. And he talks about how he gave up drinking because drinking was definitely one of the things that he did, and he did it socially, and he did it on a regular, but then he saw that he had to change. But then he also said that, when he was a child, when his father would be working, he would be with his grandmother, Sarah Jones, and his father actually worked, the actual gang that his father worked for was called the Jones Boys. Well, actually, I'm sorry, Sarah Jones was his mother. I apologize. Susan Jones was his grandmother, so his grandmother had a hand in taking care of him and raising him as well. But then he said that there was always this level of fear every time his mother came around because of her mental illness. She can spaz out and become violent just like that. So I think his grandmother kind of warned him that, be careful being around your mother because she's dangerous. So he always had that level of fear when dealing with his mom because of her outbursts and her, mental instability. So in 1940, his father wanted to give him a better upbringing, so they moved to Seattle, where he got work with the Naval Shipyard, and he also learned a strong work ethic by his father, which is why he's such a hard worker and why he always strives to do a good job, and he's been that way through his 70 years in the music business. And pretty much, he definitely said that, even in Seattle, he was still doing, petty crimes and stuff. And I think they said he broke into an armory and he saw a piano there where he sat and started to play on it. And he says that was a moment that changed his life, that he began to leave all of this gangster shit behind and began to focus on a new dream, which was being an artist and a musician. So we see it, at the early ages, he, learned multiple instruments, but the one he took up was the trumpet. and you see him working, being part of Count Basie's band at the age of 14. And later on within that time, he ends up meeting a kindred spirit who became like a big brother to him, and that was Ray Charles, because him and Ray Charles met in Seattle, and we definitely saw that in the movie Ray. Ray was 16 at the time, and Quincy Jones was 14, so they were 2 years apart, but they were brothers all the way up until Ray Charles died. They had that close family relationship, and when it came down to them doing music for each other, they never had a contract. It was always a handshake, because they trusted each other and they respected each other's artistic creativity that much, and that was remarkable to know that. We also see that he got married to his first wife very young, Jerry Caldwell, and with her he had his first daughter. His first daughter, Jolie. So, then they throughout the documentary, they're playing some of his infamous songs, like Soul Bossa Nova, which became the theme for Austin Powers. Also, they also played the theme from Sanford and Son, another one of his infamous compositions. They also played, what are the songs they played? Definitely Stomp by Brothers Johnson. Man, they played so much stuff. They also played, what's the name of that song? Because I think Farside covered it. I think it was called Summer Breeze. They definitely played that one. And it was just refreshing for me, because Quincy Jones has done so much great music. They even played The Dude, which is actually one of my favorite albums from him, because one of my favorite songs on The Dude was Razzmatazz with Patty Austin, another artist he helped put on the map. And Patty Austin is definitely one of my faves, and she's still a legend as of now. So and he still has a very close kinship with her as well. And James Ingram, another one, because, he helped launch his career as well. So he's definitely had his hand in so much as far as some of the great musical talents that we know and that we look to as legends to this day. Definitely one of them being, the king of pop, Michael Jackson. And he even talks about, being part of Lionel Hampton's. He joined Lionel Hampton's band, I think, around the age of 18. They did like 70 straight nights with no days off, and he loved doing what he loved performing, And he also talks about how much he had to deal with racial segregation, especially growing up, in the late 1930s in the South Side of Chicago, because there's still a lot of racial tension in Chicago today because it's so divided. And seeing that he comes from that environment and how he constantly had to deal with racism throughout his career, and how he, pretty much, decided that he was not going to let, that define him, and that he was going to push through regardless of segregation. And that was definitely remarkable, and he's developed a lot of great relationships in the industry. He also talks about, traveling to Paris, where, he learned from, where, he definitely traveling all over the world with Lionel Hampton, and, definitely they also played, Soul Bossa Nova, which is definitely one of my tracks. I love listening to that. It's the thing for Austin Powers, but I just love the musicality of it. And also, I also like the musicality that the score he did for Ironside, which is very infamous in the movie Kill Bill. Boom, 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 dun, 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 dun. I love it. Every time I hear that part, it takes me out. Because it's so big and it's just so theatrical that it just makes me excited. And it's funny because even though it's a score. I just love listening to his compositions because he's very melodic, he's very playful, and he even says that pretty much part of it is artist and technique, but then he says 30% you need to leave open for God to come into for God to come into the room and bring in a new element that's not there, something that comes from higher above, like magic. And I thought that was a great technique, saying that part of it is your artistic credibility, but then part of it is because the Lord is blessing you. And I thought that was very, very beautiful. But then he also talks about ego in art, and he says there's nothing wrong with having strong confidence, but an ego is pretty much, in his opinion, overstressed insecurity. So it's never good, because you're supposed to always be learning and growing as an artist. And then after he left Lionel Hampton, he wanted to start doing musical compositions for artists. And the first artist he worked with was Dinah Washington. And then from there he worked with Louis Armstrong, Count Basie, Sarah Vaughan, Dizzy Gillespie, and even Ray Charles. And then, this definitely put him into orbit. He even said that even during his heyday, his mom went to look for him, and he just felt, it's just like every time his mom come around, he would somewhat kind of break into a cold sweat and was shut down because of her mental illness. He never really developed that strong mother and son bond that he definitely craved for. And she even kind of said that, you need to make music for the Lord, and if you ain't making music for the Lord, then you're on a fast track to hell. So stuff like that definitely bothered him, because here it is, this is his mom, but yet she doesn't connect with him, in the way that she should, and it was due to her mental illness. And talking about this was very apparent, because mental illness is real, and it's not something to take lightly. But then he was even talking about how, that black artists weren't allowed to write for strings because they felt that black artists didn't know nothing about strings. He changed the game with that, because in '57 he moved to Paris, and he learned from the great Natalie Debussy, who was famous for working with Igor Stravinsky, and she's pretty much was a master of classical music. So. And he said being at Paris, he was free as an artist and also free as a black man. And we definitely saw that with, what happened with Josephine Baker. I mean, over there, Josephine Baker was treated like the greatest superstar of all time, whereas in America, she was treated totally different. So it was great that he made that comparison. And then also we see in this documentary, he was actually asked to become the producer of the opening of the African American Smithsonian Museum here in Washington, D.C. And I definitely remember seeing it on TV. It was a remarkable show, and he had some of the biggest people involved, from Oprah Winfrey to John Legend to Dave Chappelle. I mean, it was just a phenomenal show, and it definitely moved me to tears in some moments, because it really talked about our history and how much we have overcome as being black in America. And he also talks about how he wanted to create a band together. He wanted to create his own band, but they struggled, as far as after 6 shows they pretty much were closed. But he tried to stick it out, which actually kind of put him in debt and got him. And he pretty much was stuck. So in '61, he actually said he actually got his first job, and it was actually the vice president of Mercury Records, and he was the first African American to hold a vice president position in a record company. And while he was there, he had to go through tapes and had to listen to all these different demos, and one demo stuck out, and he decided that he wanted to work and produce it himself. And it was from 16-year-old Leslie Gore, and the infamous song is "It's My Party," It's my party and I cry if I want to. Cry if I want to. Cry if I want to. You would cry too if it happened to you. Dun 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 dun. I mean, just timeless music that even we hear today. Quincy has put a stamp on it, and he had over over 18 hits with Leslie Gore, and he helped make her career. You know, and then also he said that one of the things he was never successful at was at marriages, because he, definitely because of temptation and him being on the road, I think he had a total of, 3 marriages and even though he still has great relationships with his ex-wives, they just never lasted because of his career, and also because, hey, being a musician, there's always money and temptation, so infidelity was definitely an issue that he dealt with. But he said one of the best collaborations that changed his life was working with Frank Sinatra. And, pretty much, Frank Sinatra knew his genius, and he loved working with Quincy Jones. And, definitely when it came down to Vegas, it was Frank Sinatra, because we knew back in those days Vegas was extremely racist. We definitely saw it in the movie Introducing Dorothy Dandridge, and we've even heard reports, from some of the greats, even Nat King Cole and many others, who they were headliners in some of the clubs, but yet they couldn't use the casinos and they couldn't stay in some of the luxurious hotels. They had to stay somewhere in the black community, which was outside of the city. So it was Frank Sinatra was one of the main people who stopped that, because he says if these artists can't stay in these hotels, then you don't want me here. And Frank Sinatra became like the king of Vegas, and definitely during the days of the Rat Pack. So then things started to change for black artists, where they were now treated with respect, and they were able to stay in the lodging and were being treated like the stars that they were, because even though they were headlining these great shows, they were made to eat in the kitchen, and they couldn't even stay in the hotel, which was insane. And we definitely saw this in the movie Introducing Dorothy Dandridge, where she put her foot in the pool and they drained it, and you see all these black men literally scrubbing the pool as if like she was dirty. And that had to be sad, that here it is, you're this great talent, but yet you're treated like trash just because of the color of your skin. So pretty much bigotry was very big in Las Vegas, and Frank Sinatra, along with many others like Nat King Cole, were very instrumental in shutting that down. And he said that the same situation that he had with Frank Sinatra was also the same situation he had with Ray Charles, that it was never contracts, just a handshake, because they respected each other's talent. And then after working with Frank Sinatra, he wanted to get into doing film scoring. And, some of the films that he was known to score for were like, The Pawnbroker, In Cold Blood, which was based on the book by Truman Capote, Ironside, The Getaway, The Italian Job, In the Heat of the Night with Sidney Poitier. So he left a major mark in doing scores for movies. And as far as television, he's definitely infamous for doing the theme song for Sanford and Son. A theme song that is synonymous to all of us who were big Sanford and Son fans. His second wife, Ula, he had 2 children. Martina and Quincy Jones, the third, his only son, and his son is also a producer and arranger himself, and definitely a business mind in his own right. And we even seen they even show his son interviewing him, which I thought was pretty cool. And then we also see in this documentary that he actually developed this artist troupe that travels all over the world. Justin Coughlin, Alfredo Rodriguez, Jacob Collier, and Richard Bonner, which are phenomenal talents. And then we see how he is very well known all over the world. And then we see that in 72 he meets Peggy Lipton, who is an actress who was famously known for her role in the Mod Squad with Clarence Williams III. Definitely loved her role in that, and they literally were married for about 14 years. And out of that marriage were two children, Kadada and Rashida, who's also the producer and director of this documentary. And we even see that in this time he's became somewhat of a leader in music. And him and Duke Ellington worked together as well, and he was saying that he was trying to stop this categorizing of American music, stop putting labels on it, and let artists be free to explore and expand their artistic credibility. And then they also show some of his that he was the first African American to be nominated for Best Song, the first African American to be nominated for both Best Song and Best Original Song. He was also the first African American to conduct the Academy Awards. So he definitely was a groundbreaking artist, and he literally knocked down doors for many artists to come. And then they also talk about where he had a brain aneurysm on one side, and then he also had to have surgery on the other side because both of his vessels in his brain popped. So due to that, he could no longer play trumpet, but it still kept him going. He actually used some of his health issues as superpowers, and he kept moving forward. And he even talks about in this documentary how he saw a lot of people that he worked with that are now gone, but yet he's still here. And he says it's sad, but I was happy to have the opportunity to work with these great people, and that they're always with me. And I thought that was very moving. And you definitely see that there is a sadness in him when he talks about his mother, because that mother bond he never had. And I think that was one of the things that kept him going, was also his father's strong work ethic that he passed down to him, but also the fact that he was trying to create a better life than the life that he was born into. He definitely wanted better for his children, which was definitely monumental and inspiring from just on that alone. And then he also, did the music score for Roots, Alex Haley's Roots. He's also done a lot of albums like You Got a Bad Girl. I love that album. Mellow Madness, definitely love that one too. And then also, he also did the score for the movie The Wiz. Definitely one of the classics. Which pretty much had Diana Ross, Michael Jackson, Nipsey Russell, and Ted Ross, pretty much given the soul version of The Wizard of Oz. And he was a producer and arranger of the score, and this was when he first met Michael Jackson, who at the time was 20 years old, and he was looking for a producer to actually be a part of his solo debut. And what inspired Quincy was that he saw Michael's discipline. He saw how at 5 a.m. he was there getting hours done of makeup, how he knew his lines, he knew all of his cast members' lines, he knew all the songs, he was in it, and he said he loved his dedication, that he decided that I'm going to produce this guy because he is actually serious and there's a gem there. And then that album was Off the Wall, which I had to say was Michael Jackson's best album ever. Even though Thriller was the best-selling album, I had to say his best artistic album was definitely Off the Wall, in my opinion, because Off the Wall has some great songs. And definitely one of the people that he had involved in the team of his production was Rod Temperton, which I have to say is one of the best songwriters of all time. Being a member of the group Heat Wave, Rob Temperton definitely was a renowned songwriter, and he wrote for many artists. And then he had this strong team of musicians that created great work. And definitely, Off the Wall was a hit. It sold 8 million copies. Michael won a lot of awards. He even won a Grammy for I think Best Male R&B Performance. So for Don't Stop Till You Get Enough. But then, Thriller was the game changer. It was pandemonium. You know, and it was a revolutionary move in music, especially with the Thriller video. It was like a short movie, and that literally changed the game, because now he was not only an artist, as far as audio, but he was also a visual artist, through the start of because by this time MTV's only been around for 3 years, so he was the first African American to get on TV, and Whitney Houston was the first woman ever on MTV. So he literally was a groundbreaking artist on MTV, and I remember Thriller was playing all the time, and I remember hearing Thriller a lot as a little boy, because I was born in '83, so definitely I remember Thriller throughout my life, and definitely growing up, Thriller still is timeless to me. And we even see that also that Quincy Jones was really into health, fitness, and yoga at an early age. But then after his stroke, he worked on getting back to exercising. Because he was getting blood clots, was actually caused him to be rushed to the hospital. So he saw that okay, I got to make some lifestyle changes. But then definitely the success of Thriller was pandemonium. It won a Grammys, and Michael and Quincy was just known as this dynamic team who changed the music game and literally had the mainstream of music literally at the edge of their seats. And it was really a revolutionary moment, and it was very powerful, because it was black men who literally changed the game of music. And from that point, Michael Jackson was known as the king of pop. Everything Michael touched turned to gold. And definitely Quincy Jones was known as the producer with the Midas touch. And definitely also he was also the producer of We Are the World. Also, he was the producer as well as music director for The Color Purple, and he was also the person that discovered Oprah Winfrey. He was the one that found Oprah Winfrey, and due to Quincy Jones, that's how she got the role in the movie The Color Purple, which really started Oprah's career and really made her as the mogul and the mogul that she is today. She definitely owes that to Quincy, because Quincy definitely put her out there to the mainstream, and definitely her role in The Color Purple was definitely a great role, because she did get an Oscar nomination as Best Supporting Actress. So, but definitely him working as producer as well as music arranger for the movie definitely took a toll on his marriage with Peggy Lipton, and they ended up divorcing not too long after that movie. And then he even talks about work was a way for him to keep running from to fill the hole in my soul. One of those holes being the broken relationship with his mom. And then he said at this time after The Color Purple, he had to reconstruct his life and started to reach out to his kids, because he said that his children kind of bared, that some of his success was at the expense of him spending time with his children. So here it is, he pretty much, revamped his life and started to spend more time with his kids. They had clips of them at the water park having fun, and it was just really cool to see that. Then we actually see that he has a conversation with Kendrick Lamar, and Kendrick Lamar coming from Compton, him coming from the South Side of Chicago. They know what that hard life is like, especially Quincy, because he was even harder, being black in the late 1930s. And then they was talking about rap, and he asked Kendrick Lamar, where does rap come from? He says, well, far as I know, the Bronx, he was like, shit. Rap came from Africa, from the praise shouters. That's where rap originated from. And we definitely saw that emergence of that hip hop sound in jazz, with beatboxing, with bebopping. It was about having swag, and it was about being hip and about being sharp, being aware. And we see that hip hop has always been about, social consciousness, being aware, and being explicit. And definitely, what he showed with the Back on the Block album of how jazz was the precursor to hip hop. And he did it with such genius. And this was also the first time he won a Grammy as an artist by himself. I mean, he won many Grammys, but this is the first Grammy he won, for his album himself. He won many for doing scores and television scores and also working with other artists, but this was the first one he won outright for his work as an artist. So this Grammy was very special to him for Back on the Block, and definitely definitely an album that definitely still rings true to me, because it definitely inspired this young man who, was 7 years old, moving to North Carolina for the first time. So definitely, Quincy has definitely been a part of my life, and I definitely have my grandmother to thank for it, because my grandmother also had a good ear for music, so I learned a lot from music from her as well as my uncles. So definitely, treasures that I will never forget. And then we see after him doing Back on the Block, he created, Quest Broadcasting, which was his own broadcasting and production company. And one of the biggest projects, which actually changed the life of Will Smith, was The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Will Smith would not be the icon he is today if it wasn't for Quincy Jones, because Quincy Jones gave him a new avenue where he became an actor as well as an executive producer on the show. So this changed the game for Will, and also for television, because it was a major hit show. I still watch the episodes to this day, and definitely was a show that I grew up with and I lived for it. Also, he was the creator of Vibe magazine. I always was reading Vibe magazine growing up in my teens, and then also they show that after the death of Biggie and Tupac, due to this whole East Coast and West Coast rival, he held this music summit where, you had Dre, Suge Knight, and so many different, people from the music industry that were there. And it showed that, that Quincy Jones was very emotional, was saying that, look, we need to change the narrative, and we need to start bringing back positive vibes within music, because we just can't keep losing our artists. Because when we lost Biggie and we lost Tupac, we lost true artistic gems, both of them, especially Pac, and definitely that's something that he didn't take lightly. And definitely with Pac, why I said that is because, he became like somewhat of a close father figure to him. And then they also talk about his relationship with Natasha Kinsky. I think she was a model, and he had his that's where his youngest daughter, Kenya Kinsey, was born. And they showed him working with United Nations, him working with leaders like Bishop Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela, Barack Obama, and then they also showed a clip, where he was talking about how many friends he lost through throughout the years, one of them being his big brother Ray Charles. And they showed at the Kennedy Center Honors, where Quincy Jones was an honoree, Ray Charles did a tribute to him, and we see that Quincy Jones was just overcome with emotion, because they came so far with each other. And definitely through his performance, we can tell that Ray Charles was pretty much on his last legs. And Ray Charles is definitely a legend that will never be forgotten. And then again, they actually showed and the thing about that I loved about this documentary is that you really got to see Quincy's personality. He is so cool and so laid back, and You know, he talks like a cool cat, and I hope that I will be honored to be in his presence one day, and I would love to sit down and have a conversation with him about music and about artistic creativity. And I know I could just learn a lot from him just in a conversation, because he's so knowledgeable and he's so giving of himself and so giving to the passion of music. And it's just beautiful. And that's what I have, everybody. Definitely, if you have some ideas or thoughts, put them in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But subscribe to my channel. Click that bell so you get notifications every time I drop a video. Also, follow me on all my social platforms. I have them all listed in the description box. Also, like this video, comment on this video, and share this video. And I will definitely be back with another review. So until next time, I'm sorry. I will definitely be back with another review for you guys. So until next time, everybody, take care.